Captain Lovell, it's a genuine honor to be connecting with you. Just a bit of background. I attended the Cosmosphere camps a long, long time ago, and then later worked there as a camp counselor. So it's a real treat to get to work with Mimi and the Cosmosphere on a number of these projects. And we're really, really thrilled to be speaking with you. We thought we could, sort of go through an interview in a couple of different parts. We're putting together insights for not only young learners, but then also adults in terms of lessons they can learn around collaboration, communication from your time at NASA. So we thought we'd start with a focus on lessons for young learners around the world, and Mimi will jump in at any point for other builds and questions and that sort of thing. And there's really sort of an organic conversation here. But first of all, we wanted to ask you about effective habits for students. So when students are coming through school, especially over the last couple of years, there's been a challenge for them to develop real effective habits as they go through school. So is there a habit that you would recommend that students incorporate into their day-to-day lives?
Well, I think that the students have to take a grip on what the school is doing and try to emphasize their learning ability in the subjects that they're approached to, and whether it's history or English or math or what have you, to take a real strong stance on learning what the teacher is teaching them.
So I have a question. What was your favorite subject when you were in middle school and early high school? What was your favorite subject?
My favorite question?
Your favorite subject when you were a student?
Oh, subject?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I liked math and I liked history. Both those were, subjects I just absorbed quite a bit.
Do you think that studying those subjects affected the career path that you took? Do you think that your interest in that helped you?
Yes, I think it influenced me quite a bit. I really enjoyed actually space before we had space programs. I read a chapter from a professor on a method of reaching extreme altitudes, and he was working on liquid fuel rockets at this time, and wrote using those rockets to get to high altitudes. And this sort of intrigued me. As a matter of fact, in high school, I think in our junior year, a friend of mine and myself built a little rocket using gunpowder from taken from 4th of July stuff, and it worked. But we really enjoyed it. I learned everything I was in high school during World War II, and we learned about the German V-2 rocket. In fact, we had one in Milwaukee that was captured, just pieces of it after it landed in England, and we went down to look at it. So I had that fascinating for that particular subject. And when I went to the Naval Academy, I wrote on the development of the liquid fuel rocket. It was one of my term papers. And my girlfriend at that time typed it up for me, and I got a good grade on it. So, I was interested in that subject for many, many years.
Well, building on that, content around finding subjects you were interested in, particularly math and history, and then literally building a rocket when you were coming through school. But I think when you're discovering those, it helps with the motivation to continue that curiosity. But what's your advice for students looking to stay motivated and accountable as they continue to make sort of their own discoveries about what they enjoy in school?
Well, I think as they go in school, they'll be introduced to many different subjects. I think that the ones they really like, they should concentrate on it. As a matter of fact, that might lead them up to their later on professional life, because they tend to want to like those subjects, whether it's history or English or math. They'll concentrate on those, and get instructions from their teachers, and that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, Mimi, go ahead.
For some students today, Captain Lovell, I think it's just hard to know where to start. There's so much information, and there are so many expectations. I'm sure you've heard the term helicopter parent, and there are a lot of pressures that take up a lot of their free time. And we haven't left a lot of time for curiosity. And I think I've heard you talk before about just the importance of wondering, of exploration and curiosity. And how would you tell young people today to nurture that sense of curiosity?
Well, I think one thing is that people should have a good sense of curiosity. They should try to, what they see, they should try to understand. And I think that's basically curiosity. You know, they see something and they don't understand it, and they should learn about it.
And building on the curiosity piece, once they're looking to develop knowledge so that they understand more about what they're curious, and also looking back at your years when you were coming through school, is there any advice you would give to your younger self as a student? If you could go back knowing you were highly motivated, highly curious, you're literally, you know, building rockets on your own at the young age. But is there any advice you give to your younger self, like looking back on your early years in school?
Well, the only advice I could give them is if you're curious about a certain subject, you know, whether it's rockets or, you know, a million other subjects that you really enjoy, that might be the forerunner of what you're really going to be doing as an adult. I mean, because people tend to think about and learn certain things and then want to keep at it. And when they leave school, they'll be looking for positions and jobs and things like that that sort of enhance what they've been thinking about all the time. Maybe some person loves math, and so they'll start to look and maybe go into jobs that have math as their basics, you know, banking or something of this nature.
That's interesting that you talk about that passion leading to what you do. And as a young child, you were using gunpowder to create a rocket. I just have to ask, what did your mom say?
Well, she didn't know too much about it at the time. This was one of those secret programs that we did go to the school, though. This is high school. And we got our fuel in the chemistry department. And the doctor was not quite aware, the teacher, I should say, was not quite aware of what we wanted. In fact, I even went down to visit my aunt one time in Chicago. I lived in Milwaukee. And while I visited my aunt in Chicago, I went down to downtown Chicago, and there was a store, a chemical store, that I, you know, naive as I was, I walked in there and asked for some ingredients, like, I forget what they were now, but the ingredients essentially were the ingredients that made gunpowder. And I didn't know that at the time. As I talked to the guy asking, can I buy this and can I buy that? And he says, do you know what these things make up? I said, no. He says, gunpowder. Now you can imagine today, if I walked in there, I'd be surrounded by police and quickly thrown into jail.
That is just hilarious. It must have been, you must have had this really, well, you were an Eagle Scout, so you probably had that wholesome, you intend no harm kind of aura about you that made him feel like you weren't going to do anything horrible.
Well, I imagine how many young people, high school students, get an addiction to some subject and then carry that through to adulthood. And that's what happened to me. And, you know, of course, I grew up in a very poor family, and my father had died, and I was being, my mother and I my mother, taught me and was my person that I grew up with, and yet I managed to take what I loved in high school and continue it on as an adult. Of course, nature has a way of things happening that satisfied me. I mean, how else could I grow up suddenly when there was a space program? And I suddenly came into it. So, nature has this way of helping you sometimes.
That's right. And we're going to segue in a minute to talking about adult leaders instead of the leadership qualities for youth. And I had a chance last week to meet Tony Bruno, the new CEO of United Launch Alliance. Have you met him?
Who is this again?
The CEO of ULA, the United Launch Alliance.
I met a lot of people that were in that same business over the years so I could have met him. I don't know for sure.
Well, I just think it's interesting because you have a similar story. When he was 9 years old, he was raised by his grandmother. And when he was 9 years old, he broke into a shed. Well, the shed may have been unlocked. I don't know that he broke into it, but he got into a shed where dynamite was stored. And he broke open one of the sticks of dynamite and and launched a rocket with that. He was fascinated with rocketry from a really early age. And so, his career has followed that same trajectory. So you two should definitely meet.
Yeah, but rockets have long since and integrated and of young men. There's something about going up into space and shooting something up there long before there was a space program.
Right. Well, so in addition to that curiosity and the passion, I think Sandy has some questions about what else goes into preparing a person for a career in space or a career anywhere where leadership is expected? Even if you're not a CEO of United Launch Alliance, if you're just a captain or you're part of mission control.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like thinking of leadership lessons for adults who are working for companies of all sizes. Sometimes they're working for themselves. Over the years, you've been seen as a consummate leader working with teams of all sizes and leading solutions for literally impossible problems. And so thinking of, I suppose, big picture traits for leaders, if you think of an ideal leader, what sort of traits does an ideal leader inhabit, in their adult lives?
Well, I think leaders have to be leading a subject which they really loved and they wanted to explore because they wanted to learn more about this subject, and it always intrigued them, and they want to see how they can succeed, and each milestone gives them a sense of satisfaction to lead. And they also like to work with people, especially a group of people, so they could also work and get the results just like he wants his own results.
Yeah, Mimi, go ahead.
I was just thinking, we have this new batch of leaders coming up with the Artemis mission. Are you following all that?
Well, I look at them and what I can see on their television, and there's a lot of offshoots to our original space activities. All sorts of people would like to participate in it, and all sorts of people that have the money to do it are building their own systems and giving other people who can afford it, the excitement of going up into high altitude.
Right. I can guarantee you that at the Cosmosphere, we don't even compare them to your era of astronauts. But we do think there are some really I feel like history is almost repeating itself with the NASA program. And as this new group of 26 astronauts gets ready to return to the moon, and they're vying to see which of them will be on that coveted flight. So was there a competitive atmosphere in your astronaut class? And did you jockey for position, or what did you do to try and put yourself in a place that you would be one of the lucky few that got an assignment?
Well, I try to be one of making suggestions that might be good, looking at the program very intimately, so that I was prepared in case I was asked to participate. And of course, it's like any other job. I mean, you go in there, you try to make the good impression is what it is, and say, oh, he knows all about this already. Maybe he's the one we should pick. And it gets very competitive because the people that were in that program along with myself, enjoyed that topic quite a bit. That was one of the things they investigated, they read about, they learned all about. And so the competition was really intense.
Yeah, and building on that competitive piece, it'd be really interesting to think of the transition from that to a few specific missions. And so, Mimi and I and millions of people across the world are inspired by the Earthrise photo from Apollo 8. Such a source of inspiration to literally millions of people when they see it. And we were wondering, what do you think when you look back at that photo now? What do you think about when you see Earthrise, having been on the mission that took the most famous photo ever taken? What do you think about when you see it?
Well, I think I made a statement at that time. I said, I see the Earth as it really is, an oasis in the vastness of space. And that's what it is. It's an oasis. It's where life exists, sitting out there on this planet.
One of the things I think about Apollo 8 that impressed me, well, I loved when you all were here December of 2018 and you were here with your grandson and we got to celebrate that together. And I understood more profoundly how it must have felt to learn that your whole mission was changing and everything that you were going to be called upon to do was now on this expedited schedule. So when you were thinking about your yes or no to be on Apollo 8 instead of 9 and to make that journey, back to that sense of competition, did that have any influence on you, that the race with the Soviets and to try and beat them into space? Because I was impressed that one time you just said you just wanted to go explore. So what do you remember from that?
Well, there was a competition, of course, between the United States and Russia of space flight, and that's of going to the moon, or at least orbiting the moon. And we had some idea of the progress that Russia had, and we were attempting to change it. Actually, the moon, that space flight was originally scheduled merely to take a lunar module up in Earth orbit and check it out. And then, due to information we had learning about what the Russians were doing, we changed that flight to go around the Earth. Go around the moon, as we would do later on to land on the moon. But this merely to go fly and go around the moon and look at the far side of the moon and come on back. And it was very, the timing couldn't be more perfect. Christmas, it ended in December. And here three guys were orbiting the moon and reading from the Gospels and looking, giving our impressions of the moon. There's an interesting incident about that. As we approached the moon, Borman got air sickness, and he was throwing up, and Anders relayed back down to the mission control the situation that Borman was feeling. And there was one thing that I wish I had said, and I didn't. I would have called him and said, look, I waited to go to the moon since high school. Motion sickness of Borman is no factor now. We're not going back early. He just has to get over it. And we'll call him up if he's sleeping to look at a crater once we got there. But yeah, so, but all we did was keep quiet when he was getting sick. Fortunately, they did. I think they thought about turning us back, but they didn't. Thank goodness. And Borman finally got over it.
That is the best story. Oh my goodness. We'll wake you up when we get there. Just get over it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I know that Sandy has a really unique background. I hope that you two get to visit with each other someday. But one of the things was he's gotten to work with Ron Howard, Sandy Marshall, our Sandy on this call. And he was visiting with Ron Howard and his brother, see if I get this story right, Sandy, on a movie set one day. And they were talking about Apollo 13. And they said that that is the only movie that they've ever produced or been in Clint's case, that they ever watch start to finish when it comes on TV. They watch it every time. So, I thought that was a pretty great tribute. And I know Sandy had some thoughts about Apollo 13 and how it's impacted your thinking and the thinking you did during that harrowing time.
Yeah, thank you. It's such a true story, and given the background at the Cosmosphere, had to ask Ron and Clint about, the connection with the movie and everything. And yeah, they lit right up. What's
The movie
that?
was very accurate, yes.
They're very exciting to ask them about that. So yeah, to move into the mission of Apollo 13, obviously that's a case study for problem solving. And you were speaking earlier about, the competitive environment in the astronaut class to basically sign up to solve problems. So you're competing, but you're also raising your hand and saying, I'm going to be the go-to person to solve X problem and Y situation, and I'll be ready to go. So wanted to ask you about a quote of yours and to build on it. Given the fact that Apollo 13 obviously is a case study in problem solving, we read that you once said, be thankful for your problems. If they were less difficult, someone with less ability might have your job. So we were wondering if you could share your perspectives and advice for folks today in any situation who are really looking to turn their problems into opportunities.
Well, I think what you said was correct. I mean, life is full of problem solvings. No one grows up with everything working just the way he wanted it, and you have to make those adjustments. And so, the flight of Apollo 13 was only, an extreme example of what everybody faces, every day.
Well, it's such an incredible metaphor that so many people look to for, inspiration. And I would think that when you're solving problems in very tight quarters with folks, that would be challenging. And that actually transitions us to a separate mission that we wanted to ask you about. So looking at the, Gemini 10 spacecraft, I think folks, when they see the inside of the spacecraft in a museum, are hard pressed to imagine what that space would be like with another person for 14 days. So we were wondering, how did you manage the demands of the confinement in that situation? And how do you translate that into advice for folks who today in our isolated, confined world are looking to work through challenges, both personally and professionally?
I think the answer is quite simple. The Gemini was very small. We were tight, close to Borman and myself in together. But if you're in this program and your job is going into space, and one of your tasks was to see how long people could stay in there and what are the results of 14 days of weightlessness, then you go in there with a positive attitude. I know halfway through the program, I know that Borman looked at me and says, why don't we just see if we can't come down early? And I said, no. I said, it's a 14-day flight, and we're going to do that and find out what the story is. And so, because you've set your mind to do the job. And that's with almost anything. Once you set your mind to do something that is constructive and well worthwhile doing, then you should stick with it.
Was there a time when he got on your nerves?
Huh?
I go down and I look, we have the Gemini 10 here. And if I'm having a really bad day, I will go down and stand and just soak in that capsule space and think, I don't have, as part of my work assignment today, living for 2 weeks in that space with another human. Because I can't think of another human I would choose to even my husband, and I like him. So wasn't there a point where you thought, oh, come on, got a little irritated with each other?
Admittedly, the Gemini 7 spacecraft was a little smelly, but you were able to live with that, because what you had was outside the window a great, beautiful sight that changed all the time. And you got to look at the Earth and look at those various things and say to yourself, well, here I am, what's going on down there and what's going on here. And occasionally we went over Cape Kennedy and looked at where we launched from and things like that. So we just hung in there, and that was it. And in fact, we were actually in a flight we had taken off our spacesuits and all that. We were literally in our underwear for most of that flight.
I hadn't even thought about that, but I just think you have such an incredible attitude, just a beautifully positive attitude. And even, when I've seen you interact with people, you just are so gracious and calm. And I think it's because of the way you do see the world, whether it's out the window of your spacecraft or the people you take time for right in front of you. So thank you for that. From the bottom of my heart, that's an inspiration to me. And I'm going to remember that the next time I get out of sorts. So Greg Meredith can send you his personal thing.
Yeah, looking at the Earth is always something new. I mean, as you go around, you pick new things on the Earth and wonder about them in Africa, Asia, and then you go around to the Middle East and all that kind of stuff. So 2 weeks was a long time, but it wasn't that bad, really, once you got used to it.
Well, I will say thank you as well. It is genuinely a source of inspiration. And, thinking as you were returning to the Earth from Apollo 13, to go back to Apollo 13 for a minute, when you returned, you and the crew presented a small mirror in mission control with the inscription, and we love this, from the grateful Apollo 13 crew to reflect the image of the people in mission control who got us back. So we were wondering if you could tell us the story of that mirror and the importance of folks working behind the scenes to help solve problems, both on Apollo 13 and in regular situations as well.
Well, what that mirror has said in a statement is what we thought. When we were going to leave the lunar module and get back in the command module, then we thought, what can we take back with us from the lunar module? And we took various things back into the command module, because the lunar module as we approached the Earth, we would separate, and that would burn up in space, and we didn't want to be in it. So we moved out, and both Fred and myself picked out things that we would like to save. And of course, there was the mission control that got us back. You know, they looked at where we were, what we had to do to adjust, and use the lunar module. And this is the first time we'd ever done it. They thought about the lunar module if problems occurred on these flights. And by gosh, somebody on one of them, the lunar module was it. And fortunately, we had the lunar module because we lost our propulsion system on the command module when the explosion occurred. And therefore, we used the lunar module's power not to land on the moon, but to change our course to get back. That flight also has something which is not well known, but on the flight to the moon, on all these lunar flights, especially the ones to land, we're on a orbit that's a circular orbit. I mean, not elliptical orbit, I should say, with its perigee around the Earth and its apogee around the moon. Now, on most flights, as we approach the moon on this long elliptical orbit, as we approach it, we would slow down and therefore be captured by the moon and start our rest of our program in that way. But because the explosion occurred before we got to the moon, we did not. And therefore, we kept going on this long elliptical orbit out to the perigee far beyond the moon, and then started our return back to the Earth on the original long elliptical orbit whose perigee was around the Earth. And therefore, Hayes and myself, by this consequence of doing things, have the, I guess, I don't know whether it's the good record or a bad record, or to have the two people that have been the farthest from the Earth of anybody known to man. And that record will not be exceeded until we go to Mars.
Well, and I think I hadn't realized, so did that mirror that you presented to Mission Control, did it come from the lunar module?
Well, yes, this long elliptical orbit was started as we left the Earth on a normal mission. And when the explosion occurred on the way to the moon on a normal mission, we did not slow down as we would normally do as we approached the moon, but kept ourselves going to the apogee of that long elliptical orbit that's perigee was around the Earth. And therefore, that swung us around back on a course to the Earth without having to use our power to make those adjustments. And therefore, we could use only the lunar module, and that's the only one we had at the time, to make adjustments to our course back to Earth. So if you're going to have an explosion, do it before you slow down around the moon. If we slow down around the moon and then the explosion occurred on the command module, you'd be talking to somebody who is still orbiting the moon, trying to figure out how to get home.
Oh my goodness. Well, having said that you'll be and Sandy, I'm going to kind of jump ahead here if it's okay, but that just triggered a thought with me, that you and Fred were the farthest away from Earth of anybody until we go to Mars. What do you think we should be focusing on as we look ahead? What should we as humanity be thinking of as we look to Mars and space exploration? And I want to give that just a little bit more color from my conversation or listening to this United Launch Alliance CEO last week. He was talking about all of the threats, from Russia and China, and that they aren't just threatening our satellites, but that they might eventually try to start a war from space. And for my personality, that was a lot to take in, to think. I just want to think about the return to the moon and what we can discover. So what do you feel we should be focusing on as a human race to move forward into space?
I think we should analyze the risk involved, and I think you're talking about the next subject would be going to Mars after we did our work around the moon. I think we have to acquire more confidence in making more moon landings before we think about going to Mars. But that is essentially the way I look at everything.
This has been an honor, Captain Lovell, to exchange in this discussion. I can certify that the spacecraft is in perfect hands with the Cosmosphere, having gone to many camps there and been inspired as a kid to get to one day be a part of this conversation. So it's been an honor. We're really looking forward to looking back at learning more from these insights, even having been a part of it now. And thank you, Mimi.
Well, I love to talk about old times.
Oh, well, we love to listen. It's a delight. I only wish that we were just sitting around in easy chairs by a fire. Then it would be perfect, by the fireplace talks. Well, tell Susan thank you for helping us coordinate this today, and stay safe and warm in Chicago. Tell Marilyn hello and your family.
I will do that.
All
Wonderful.
right.
Thanks so much for the time, Captain Lovell. Wonderful to meet.
Righto, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Signing off.